Now, in March 2021, the Nigerian Economic Summit Group and the Open Society Initiative for West Africa launched the Debt Management Roundtable to help Nigeria and West African countries provide a pathway to fiscal sustainability. Nigeria's debt to gross domestic product ratio increased over the years, but the relationship between both keeps rising with the nation's inability to service our debt, especially given that about 83% of the country's revenue is spent on debt servicing. The Debt Management Roundtable is believed to help provide alternatives and recommendations that the government can apply to ensure that Nigeria's debt is properly managed. Well, I introduced him earlier. Let's discuss the issues, challenges, and prospects of the DMR. And joining me to do this is a researcher, Debt Management Roundtable, Mr. Sodik Olofin. Good afternoon, Mr. Olofin.
Yeah, good afternoon.
And thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Now, let me start this way. What is the DMR research all about? Give us an insight, proper insight into this.
Well, thank you for having me once again. Like you said in your introduction, the debt situation in the ECOWAS region, beyond just Nigeria, has been on the rise, which is also the trend in the global economy. However, the rate at which it is rising in Nigeria is quite alarming, given the pace, the size, and the structure of the debt accumulation in Nigeria and other ECOWAS countries. This situation is further worsened by the spread of the coronavirus that governments across the world had to borrow, inclusive of ECOWAS country and Nigeria. So the debt situation skyrocketed in 2020. So given this situation, many countries are now in the condition or a situation where they have to borrow to service their debt or accumulate such debt servicing as another debt. So because of this situation, we anticipate that if the trend continues in this direction, there is an imminence of a debt overhang or a debt crisis in the future for most ECOWAS countries. As a result, the Nigerian Economic Summit Group and the OSIWA come together to form the Debt Management Roundtable to look into the issue, provide understanding, provide policy recommendations, and beyond recommendations, engage in advocacy to ensure that the government is able to implement policy recommendations that emanate from the research.
Very good way to start. But I would like to follow up by saying that what now are the issues and, of course, motivations for the DMR research?
Well, beyond just the problem of debt in the ECOWAS region and Nigeria in particular, we are trying to look deeper than just speaking to what the debt situation is in the country and trying to analyze the sustainability therein. So we are trying to take a deep dive, looking at some of specific issues around the debt situation in the region. For example, many of these countries over the last decade, 2006, 2007, 2008, during the period, they all received debt relief, one way or the other. However, just a decade over, many of these countries have increased their debt level in manifolds, like we have in Nigeria as at 2006 rather. The total public debt in Nigeria was 2.7 trillion, and we know what it is today, over 33 trillion. Likewise in Ghana, it was around $4.85 billion. But what we have as of 2019 was about $43 billion. So you see the rate at which the debt situation climax around these countries. There we are trying to look beyond just debt forgiveness or ability to reduce your debt, but what are the drivers of this debt in these countries? Beyond the drivers, governments have been saying that they want to borrow to support the economy, build infrastructure, and all of that. So we are trying to see a way of investigating what the impact of this debt has been on the macro space, given that the growth trajectory of most of these countries are divergent, and at the same time, most of these ECOWAS countries are susceptible to macro instability. So we want to see what it is what is the impact of debt that we have accumulated over the years on the economies of these countries. Beyond that, we are trying to see that over time we have seen, like you just mentioned, we have our debt service to revenue at over 80%. Over the first 5 months of this year, it was reported that it is 97% of revenue. Given this situation, and we still see government across the region, and especially among the less developed countries or low-income countries, so to say, still trying to emphasize the fact that some of them are still having debt to GDP ratio that is far below the IMF benchmark. So instead of us now standing on that position of low debt to GDP ratio relative to IMF benchmark, we are trying to see a way of harmonizing some of these indicators, like we have debt to GDP, external debt to GDP, external debt to export, debt service to export, debt service to revenue. We're trying to see a way of harmonizing these indicators, given that your debt is not serviced with GDP. Your debt is not serviced with exports. Your debt is not serviced directly with your reserve. Rather, it is the revenue that the government is making that we use to service the debt that we are owing. So we intend to create some divergence from the usual debt sustainability analysis, such that we harmonize all these indicators to be able to come up with an index that will speak to the situation of these countries together. And then we come up with a threshold for some of these countries to be able to ascertain whether some of them are in crisis or not. Beyond that, also, we are trying to look at a situation where if the debt situation leads us into a debt crisis, what would be the implication for other countries in the region? For example, given Nigeria's share of GDP in the region, share of debt in the region, and debt crisis in Nigeria has potential of leading to crisis in other countries. So we are trying to look into that. And at the same time, we're trying to look into providing actionable policy recommendations that will help the government manage the situation, and at the same time seek alternative measures as alternative ways to financing government projects. So those are the issues that we have.
All right. Now, but let's say so far, what would you really say the research would have to say about the debt situation? Well, we must talk about our country one way or the other, Nigeria, and of course, the ECOWAS region.
Yeah, Nigeria is the center point whenever you are talking about the region. So there is no how you are going to discuss ECOWAS situation without Nigeria. But based on some of the preliminary findings that we have, debt drivers in the region, or generally, is diverse across countries. You have so many different issues that are constituting drivers to debt. But what we notice is across these countries is that most of these countries have the tendency of always spending more than they earn. So, like for over the past decade,